So for Parshas Shelach, if you look at the Chumash on page 798, 799, the Hashem allows, and we use that word allows, Moshe to send out spies, and Hashem actually gives instructions for who should be sent out as a spy. And the Torah says, Eile Shemos HaAnashim, Asher Shalach Moshe Lasur Es HaAretz, Vayikra Moshe LaHoshea bin Nun Yehoshua. Moshe changes Hoshea's name to Yehoshua. And the question is, why does Moshe change his name? Rashi tells us, because this was a special prayer for him, Ka Yoshiacha me'atzas meraglim, may God protect you from the counsel of the spies.
How does Hoshea mean that?
So Hosea just means help. Yehoshua means God help you. So that inserts that sort of prayer. It's more the intention of what Moshe had when he said it. Yonatan ben Uziel, who wrote a Targum on the Torah, as opposed to the Onkelos Targum. Now there is some debate as to whether the Targum, the other Targum on the Torah, was written by Yonasan ben Uziel, the one who wrote the Targum on Navi. However, it's attributed to Yonasan ben Uziel, so it's called the Targum Yonasan. Targum Yonasan adds a couple of words to the verse. And it says, Ukedichama Moshe in vasanuse, Kara Moshe laHoshea bar Nun Yehoshua. When Moshe saw how humble Yehoshua was, he changed his name from Hosea to Yehoshua. The simple understanding of that, the way it's explained by most of the commentaries, is that he felt Yehoshua was in great danger because of his humility, as if he was somehow more susceptible to be influenced by others because he was a humble person. And so Moshe inserts this prayer into Yehoshua's name to give him a protection. And that would explain why, if seemingly Kalev would also end up being a good guy, and we're assuming that Kalev was always a good guy, and he was Moshe's brother-in-law according to the Medrash, he was Miriam's husband, so why didn't Moshe pray for him? And it could be, according to the simple reading of this Targum Yonasan, that Moshe felt Kalev was a stronger person who would more likely to stand up for himself. Yeshua, being very humble and more of a gentle person, needed this additional support.
Weird. Is the Targum supposed to be a translation of the Pesukim, or is it more of a commentary?
Well, Onkelos is more word-for-word translation. Yonasan and the Targum Yerushalmi will, on occasion, not everywhere, but lots of the time, will add in thoughts or ideas. And this is a great example of it. So Targum Yonasan inserts that word anava, humility, into the story to explain why Yeshua gets this prayer.
Did Moshe feel that he himself somehow was subject to being influenced? Because if we learn that Moshe was the humblest person ever, why it doesn't appear that he was so subject to that? Why would he assume?
That's an interesting question. You see, it's always easier to see that about someone else. You could get into a debate as to whether Moshe believed he was humble or not. That's a separate. But even if you assume that Moshe did see himself as someone who's working on humility and getting somewhere in the realm of humility, he still might have. I would say the fact that he maybe found himself being commonly influenced, that maybe he did see that as danger for Yehoshua. Maybe Yehoshua learned it from Moshe, and Moshe knows how much he struggles with being influenced by people, and so knowing that Yehoshua would go off with these people and they would tell him all these bad things, he knows he has to pray for Yehoshua.
I guess the other thing I was wondering, if even though Moshe was known for his humility, he was also raised to be a prince, to be a leader, so he would have perhaps obtained those skills about how not to be led by the crowd and how to lead the crowd instead.
Maybe. That's a good point. And that is a good point. It could be that Moshe also had natural leading qualities, along with being trained formally in royalty. Maybe that's part of why Moshe is such a great leader, likely the greatest leader we've had. But Yehoshua wouldn't have had those things. That's very possible. So even though he was seeing Moshe's humility, he wasn't necessarily exposed always to Moshe's training in how to stand up for himself and things like that. I think all that is the common approach which is taken. You can explain it however you want, but that explains the Targum Yonasan, who says that the reason why Moshe changes his name from Hoshea to Yoshua is because he sees Yoshua is exceptionally humble. Those are the words that the Yonasan adds. Now the Yismach Moshe, one of the great Hasidic rabbis, cites a midrash, what's called a medrash pliyah. A medrash pliyah is a medrash which makes a very strange statement or connection, and it doesn't explain itself. Then it becomes the job of the people reading the medrash to try to explain this. The medrash reads as follows: Vayikra Moshe lahashea ben Nun Yehoshua. Moshe changes Hoshea's name to Yehoshua. That is how you understand the verse in Eov chapter 14. Mi yitain tahor mitamei. Who can bring something tahor from something tamei? Lo echad, not one. That's a verse in Eov. And the verse in Eov basically says that it's only God who can bring out something tahor from something tameh. So that's why Moshe changes his name to Yoshua. This is a very difficult medrash because this verse seemingly has no connection whatsoever to Yoshua or the story of the spies at all. In fact, this verse in Eov is going to appear in many midrashim in just a couple of parshios from now. Parshas Chukas, there we find the mitzvah of the para aduma of the red heifer, and actually there is where all the midrashim connect. Mi yitain tahor mitame, who can make something tahor come out of something tame? Because as we know, the para aduma, its body makes tame the kohen and everyone who touches it, except the person who. Right, it's metaher tameim and metame tahorim. It makes people tame tahor and tahor tame. That's one of the puzzles, one of the chukim of the para aduma, which nobody understands. And even Shlomo said it's beyond me. And we say that that's mi'itin tahor mitame. That's the greatness of God who can accomplish things which we can't understand to cause something tahor to come from something tame. So you would almost think that maybe there was a typo in the Midrash. Maybe it meant to put it in Parshas Chukas. Why does this, and specifically the Midrash associates it with this verse, Vayikra Moshe LaHoshea ben Nun Yehoshua Zeh Sha'amar HaKosav. That's the meaning of the verse. Mi yitain tahor mitame. Who can make something tahor come from something tame? Lo echad, not one. So the Yismach Moshe offers a brilliant explanation to try to explain this midrash. And he explains like this. The Medrash Rabbah in this parsha says, Vayahas Kalev. As we know, Kalev gets up and gives a whole speech about, you can do it. Yes, we can. That was his speech. And the Torah uses an interesting language of Vayahas Kalev, and Kalev, what would be the right word? Shushed. Okay, let's go with that. He shushed the crowd, El Moshe, to Moshe. He shushed the crowd to Moshe. So as we know, Rashi tells us that he got up and said, this is his opening line, is this all that Ben Amram did to us? Ben Amram is usually a negative connotation, and so Kalev basically got up and said, you think that's all that this son of Amram did for us? And when the people heard that, if someone else has something to add into the shouting, into the crowd, so they all became silent. And now he had the crowd, and he said, we could go up, we could inherit it, we can overcome it, yes we can, and he told the people off. How could he do that? So the Medrash tells us, Shebatchila Amar Lahem, because up until now, Kalev had said to the spies, Ani imachem ba'etza, I am with you in this plan. Throughout the process, as they were plotting this, Kalev said to the spies, I am with you in this. Ubelibo haya lomer emes, and his plan the entire time was to find an opportunity to share the truth. Shenamar, as it says, this is in Sefer Yehoshua, where Kalev gives a speech to the people recounting to them the events. He says, V'ashev oso davar, and I responded, Kasher im levavi, what was really in my heart. V'achai asher alu imi, but my brothers who came up with me, him sives levaam, they tried to turn the people away. And so, what we're saying is, Kalev said, I shared with the people what was in my heart. In other words, as opposed to what I had been saying up till now. That's why everyone becomes silent, because people assumed, they took for granted that Kalev was on their side the whole time. He was sitting with them and agreeing with them. That's the Medrash. Let's finish the Medrash, then we'll discuss this, because this is a problem. Why was Kalev allowed to give his support and agreement with these spies up until then, in order to later reveal his true feelings? He says, the Torah says, V'chen HaKadosh Baruch Hu me'edal, Hashem himself testifies, Shenamar, Hashem says in the Parsha, V'avdi Kalev, my servant Kalev. Not too many people get to be called Avdi by Hashem. Ekev hoisa ruach acheres imo, because he had a different spirit with him. Which means Hashem himself is testifying that Kalev had some type of feeling that was different than the way he was presenting himself. Kishabau Amaraglim, so when the spies came, Amru, they said, Naman Aleinu Kalev. Kalev is with us. They assumed that they had one of these big hitters, Moshe's own brother-in-law, who was going to stand up and speak for them. Miyad Amad ala Safsel, so he stood on the bench, the Shisek as Kol Yisrael, and he silenced all the people. Shahai Mitzavchin al Moshe, who was shouting against Moshe. Shenema Bayas Kalev. Vehem ha Yisvurim, says the Medrash, they assumed Shahai Omer Lashon Hara, that he was going to speak more Lashon Hara. Lefikach Shasku, that's why they became quiet. Pasach va'amar, and instead he said, Alonala, we can ascend, v'yarashnu, also we will inherit it, ki yachal nuchala, we can do it, and that's where the debate between them starts.
So it almost sounds like he felt the necessity to be like a spy, to know what they were.
Double agent, right?
Yeah, but I'm wondering, these were all supposedly great men, so you can almost understand how they might have been intimidated or scared, especially that they had just recently been slaves and not really,
Right.
But why would he feel a need to hide his true feelings from them? Were they bad people that they would harm him or hurt him if he didn't act as a spy? I mean,
so the Meforshim say exactly that. They say that Kalev felt that to protect his life, these people actually, they did try to stone him, and they tried to commit murder in the Parsha. So they were very heated and felt very strongly about this. So he felt that he was allowed to, in this case, for the sake of protecting his life, he was allowed to lie and play along. And he felt that once he reached the camp, maybe he would be safe.
so what did Yehoshua do?
So then what about Yeshua? That's the question. So then why is Yeshua not playing along with the people too? What we're understanding from this medrash is, you see, because mostly you read the parsha, it sounds like, the spies were plotting and Yeshua and Kalev sort of refused to go along with them. But then you don't understand why the people would listen to Kalev when he gets up to speak.
I want to suggest that the language at the beginning of the Parsha is actually, seems to be saying that the spies are supposed to report to Moshe.
Right.
Okay, but it looks like at the end of the Parsha, when they're toward the, later in the Parsha, when the spies come back, instead of reporting to him, they seem to be making a whole to-do with the whole people.
Well, yeah, because they're outraged at this point, right? It's not enough to just tell Moshe.
Right,
They need to
right,
tell the whole people.
right.
Absolutely.
So I guess my thought is that they were already duplicitous in what they did, in that their charge was to report only to Moshe, which they didn't do. So I'm saying that Kalev's approach was actually justified in later light of the way that they behaved, because they didn't do what they were going to do. If the idea had been that they were actually going to do what they were charged to do, then, maybe he should have been honest with them and told them. But since they planned not to do that, and they planned to make a whole public production instead of reporting to Moshe, then it seems that was a good thing for.
I'm not quite following that. Why does the fact that they're going to fail in their instructions, why is that a reason why he would hide his true intentions?
Because I'm saying part of their plot was not just to go back and tell him. Because if someone's a leader and they get advice from their staff about whatever it is, that person can either take it or leave it. In this case, the spies didn't.
Well, no, I'm getting that part. How does that translate into why Kalev would or wouldn't lie? In other words, what about the fact that they now plan on telling the Jewish people is a reason why he would pretend to play along?
I'm saying that because they planned to tell their story to the whole Jewish people and not to Moshe. That's why he would keep it a secret, because he couldn't, since they were going to do it in that way, rather than to just go to Moshe, and honestly, they
Right.
would then be presumably accepting whatever Moshe said. So he felt, I'm not dealing here with principled people, and so that's why I have to.
I'm not following. Because they're unprincipled, why is that a reason why he would not tell them or change what he's saying? Because they're liars, you have to lie to them? What does he gain?
Maybe the idea is, you know how you're allowed to fool somebody who has cheated you in terms of what he was going to pay and all that sort of stuff?
I don't know if you are, but even if you are, that would be in order to get back your losses. What is he gaining here? What's his goal?
It's not even so much a matter of his own personal losses, but it's a matter of principle. If the idea is to be able to tell the Jewish people the truth about this, and the only way he feels he's going to be able to tell them.
Oh, so that's what you're saying. I think that's the point you have to stress, is that Kalev realizes that if it's going to go to the people,
Right.
he'll never get a chance to speak if he
That's
doesn't
right.
first create this impression that he's with it, and then he'll use that. So that was his plan all along.
Yes.
And now here's the question: does that justify lying? You might.
Was he outright lying, or was he?
Well, the way the Medrash says it, but ani imachem ba'etza, I am with you on this. The Medrash seems to suggest that he didn't just nod his head. He actually told them, I agree with this, I like this, I'm joining with you on this, Moshe is wrong, this is an outrage, we're going to tell. He pretended he played along. And you're saying that it's because he felt that this would be his way of getting to the people, and I think that that's probably the way you should learn into this medrash. Mm-hmm. The only problem is, why is that justified? Are you allowed to lie to people in order to trick them for some other means? How does that justify committing a sin of lying?
Okay, well, I think that I learned something recently in Masechet Megillah that might shed some light on this. There's a, in fact, you were helping me with the interpretation. There's a discussion in the Second Megillah about messing with evil people, that
Right.
you shouldn't mess with them. And there's also a contrary statement.
But that you're gonna have trouble from that, because that Gemara just says whether you should quarrel with them or start up with them.
Okay, so
It doesn't say anywhere that because if you are allowed to, that you're somehow allowed to use improper means by which to overcome them.
well, I think that if the people are themselves using improper means, and the point
that's
that
not-
let me just make this one
Right.
point. Okay, one of the interpretations is that you can mess with them, with evil people, if it's for the sake of Hashem, as opposed to your own.
But that's messing with them. That's fighting with them, or even getting into arguments with them. Where are we saying that?
I got that. So the only way that he would be able to fight with them would be to do it this way.
But who said you're allowed to do it? You're telling me that because it's the only way he could think of, that's the way he's allowed to do it. Who said that the end justifies the means? Who said that two wrongs make a right? The truth is, they're doing a really serious wrong. Such a serious wrong that an entire generation of Jews, and maybe all Tisha B'Avs, are a result of the wrong that they did. But who said that you are allowed to lie in order to
To save the generation.
save?
You are allowed to lie for pikuach nefesh, though.
So if it's
So
pikuach
if
nefesh,
he thought, that's why I was asking, if he thought somehow his life was in danger, and why would he think his life was in danger if these are the leaders of the people? Aren't we assuming that they are good people, or
Well,
these people
well-
that power has already corrupted?
Right, that's exactly. We know that by the time they are, there's a consideration of danger. But that's a different approach than what Dr. Appleson is suggesting. If you take the approach that he felt that his life was in danger, and so he's allowed to play along, right? You're allowed to dress up and pretend to be in order to escape from no issues. Pikuach nefesh is docha, 610 commandments. It's only the big three, and lying isn't one of them. To save a life, you're allowed to lie. So if you say that, but if it was only in order for him to, which some learned, that was the plan that he had, was to act as a double agent. So where's the precedent? Where do you see that you're allowed to lie in order to foil the plot of people who are about to do something bad? Who said that you're allowed to do something wrong to save other people from doing something wrong? Two wrongs shouldn't
Was he
make a right.
was
I mean,
he-
you have to prove it. You can't just say, well, it doesn't make sense. You've got this big sin and the small sin. Who said? Who said that you can sin a small sin in order to save others from a big sin?
Was he a prophet? Did he know that if these people succeeded in this lashon hara, that all these other people would lose their lives in the desert? Could it still be a pikuach nefesh?
Maybe, but you'd have to insert that, and that's a difficult explanation, that Kalev somehow understood or knew what the punishment of God would be, or he knew that there was
So there's
life in
also-
danger. Who said that people would even listen to them? He somehow felt that he's justified in lying.
And then if he also felt that his life was in danger, how come Yeshua did it? Why didn't Yeshua have to do this? So
If you're allowed to lie for shalom bayis, why wouldn't you be allowed to lie to?
So it's interesting. Maybe you could say for the sake of shalom between the Jewish people, but then you run into the question of, are you allowed to lie, or are you allowed to change things? Are you allowed to make adjustments? Are you allowed to outright lie for the sake of shalom bayis? Right? Mutar l'shanos is the language. You're allowed to change, which we'll get to. Which we'll get to soon. We'll discuss this.
What
But
about Yaakov lying to?
But all that was shinui. Every single statement he said was somehow possible to be read in different directions, and that's the whole point. That's what Rashi keeps doing. Anochi Esav b'characha, right? I am who I am, and Esav is your firstborn. And actually, it makes sense because he didn't say ani; he said Anochi. Anochi is a standalone word in a sentence, and you can have all these. But the point is, who cares what you mean? Yitzchak thinks that you're calling yourself Esav. So for that, you can say that for the sake of certain purposes, you're allowed to make adjustments, which you know you're not lying. Technically, it's not a lie, even though the other person is fooling himself into thinking that's what you're saying. That's an important discussion. But here, seemingly, Kalev is making this, and over there, Yaakov had the prophecy of Rivka, if we're going to invoke prophecy, Yaakov felt that he needed to do that. And there Yaakov was in fact right, because he had taken the firstborn right. But and even there we know Yaakov is punished for that lie. Right? That's why just a few chapters later in the Torah, he wakes up in the morning and it's Leah, and he says to her, "How could you do this to me?" And she said, "I didn't do anything different than what you did to your father." And
Well, it seems like there are many cases of deception. Yosef deceiving his brothers. We're
deception and lies, and I'm saying it sounds to us like there isn't much of a difference, but there really is, because when you act in a way where you are allowing the other person to fool themselves, it really is different than when you lie. And if you'll tell me that maybe Kalev did this, maybe he might have made it sound like to them that he was with them, and like he might have said, "Oh yeah, Moshe, he is one interesting guy. Wow." Right? So they think he means negative, he means positive, something like that. Maybe, but you'd have to say that. However, it does seem from the Medrash that Kalev is, or at least we would say, since the Torah agrees with Kalev, that clearly that is okay. We know that's the end, that's okay to do. The question is, what is the justification of lying for the sake of accomplishing some greater feat?
And we see also with Yaakov's sons and the way they deal with the incident with Dinah.
Right? Yeah, that's another example of this, even though there Yaakov also kind of holds it against them. Right? Okay, so the question...
Kind of, he practically curses them in their protocol.
Well, the question is whether it was about what they did or whether it's about the way they did it. In other words, they might have been, shouldn't have killed the whole city, should have just killed those people. Because the trick, what they could have done is simply taken Dinah, maybe killed Shechem and his father, and then left the town without anyone being able to protect them because they were all weak. They decided to wipe out the town. So it's not clear whether the curse was because of the wiping out the town, which it does seem like more than the fact that they did it by gaining the people's trust and then breaking that trust. Okay, so the Yismach Moshe suggests that he wants to take the approach of Pikuach Nefesh. That in fact, Kalev understood that his life was in danger, and therefore he was permitted to do it. The question then is, that if there is an issue of Pikuach Nefesh, then how is Yehoshua allowed to not pretend? Now, assuming he could have pretended. So the Yismach Moshe quotes the Beis Yosef and the Shelach in Shulchan Aruch Kuf Nun Zayin, Yoredeh Kuf Nun Zayin. The Shulchan Aruch says, Kol Averis Shabbatorah, all the transgressions of the Torah, except for the big three, Avodah Zarah, Gila Arayis, Shvichas Damim, idolatry, adultery, and murder. If a person tells you to transgress them or he will kill you, for all the other ones, the other 610, if it is in private, you must transgress. If a guy comes to you and says, even if a Jew comes to you, if someone comes to you and says, either you eat this chazer or we will kill you, so enjoy. Bon appetit. That's, I don't know if you're allowed to enjoy it, but you can definitely eat it. V'im yirtza lahachmir al atzmo v'lehareg, but if a person wants to be machmer and allow themselves to get killed, rishai, they are permitted. What's going on? What's going on? The Rambam is very clear. This is the Shulchan Aruch. The problem is, it's pretty clear if you look in all the Rishonim that you're not allowed to. If you, the Rambam's language is, it's a really funny language, if a person allows themselves to get killed and doesn't transgress, that person is liable for the death penalty. It means that your life is really your own fault. It's like a person killing themselves because you should have transgressed. The language of the Beis Yosef is, and this is the source for the Shulchan Aruch, Imhu Adam Gadol, if he's a great person, v'chasid and pious, v'yirei shamayim and God-fearing, v'roeh shahador parutz bekach, and he makes a calculation that this decision that he makes here is going to affect not just himself, but the entire generation. Rishai, he is permitted lekadesh Hashem, to sanctify God's name, v'limsar atzmo, and to give his life, afil al mitzvah kala, even for the smallest sin, kadesh yiru ha'am leyira Hashem, so the people should see and fear God, ulavo, and to love him b'chol libam, and to serve God, to love God with all their heart. In other words, at tzaddik, if let's say the people are all in this generation are struggling with a certain subject, and if he realizes that him giving up his life for this will have such a powerful effect on everyone else, if he's an Adam, again you have to be qualified, Adam Gadol, Chassid, Yirei Shamayim, and he knows that his action will convince or teach other people to not transgress this anymore, the halacha, that's what the Shulchan Aruch means, such a person is allowed to. It's very similar to, we know if there's 10 people, and the guy comes to you and says, you better do this in order to declare yourself as not being a Jew. We know even for a shoelace, even if the Jews wear a certain type of shoelace, and they want you to wear a different kind of shoelace, that's in the days of the sages, the shoelace was an example because they had Jewish shoelaces. If there was a Jewish, and they tell you not to,
What's a Jewish shoe?
there's certain shoelaces that black or white or whatever it was that the Jews would wear, and he wants you just for you to declare yourself not to be a Jew. He wants you to wear a different shoelace. At that point, it's no longer a matter of principle. He wants you to do something. Then even for the slightest thing, you have to give your life for. Especially if it's a public thing. So So this is kind of similar, because this is one person individually who's allowed to be machmir in order to make a big statement. So he says that was Yehoshua. Yehoshua was this Adam Gadol, the Chassid. He was this pious man who felt that him being killed by the Meraglim would be enough to sway the Jewish people by seeing how terrible the sin was, that he was willing to give his life for it. So Yehoshua was willing to give his life for this, and that's why Yehoshua doesn't play along. That's what the Yismach Moshe says. Now the problem is, what?
Was it?
Well, he's taking the approach that both Kalev and Yeshua understood that their life was in danger. Except Yeshua was on a much higher level, and he was ready to make a Kiddush Hashem. He wanted them to kill him. Not he wanted them to kill him, but he wanted that if it needs to be, he should be killed, and that would stop the Jewish people from doing what they were doing. And much like Chur gave his life by the Egel. And Kalev was not on that level, so he was playing along because of Pikuach Nefesh, you're allowed to lie. That's the approach that the Yismach Moshe takes. Now Yismach Moshe says, what is the reason why a person is allowed to give their life? What happened to the rule of V'chai Bahem? V'chai Bahem means that the mitzvahs were given to live by. So who gives you the right to make a choice about your life and to say, well, if I give my life, it'll have a more powerful effect? The Torah says otherwise. The Torah says, for 610 mitzvahs you transgress, and only for 3 you give your life. Who said that you're allowed to give your life for this? So the Yismach Moshe explains, because what's the source that you have to transgress rather than die? It's v'chai bahem, the mitzvahs were given to live by them, and not to die by them. So he says, for most people, to live is to be around in the world. That's what, I'm alive because I'm in the world. And so the translation of Achai Bahem for us means continue to live in the world through the Torah. But Yehoshua was on such a high level that for him, life was to be one with the Torah. And to deviate from the Torah was to him worse than death. Then that's what V'chai Bahem means for him. So Yismach Moshe explains this halacha that the Beis Yosef cites, that for people who are a Chasid, Yirei Shamayim, what difference should that make? Why can't a sinner say, I want to make a Kiddush Hashem? The answer is because for you, your life is about living in this world. So V'chai Bahem means live by it. But for him, his life is not about enjoying the physical world. His life is about leading a spiritual life. And therefore, Yeshua was allowed to, in theory, give his life if needed to be. Says the Yismach Moshe Chiddush, he says that one of the most important qualities to qualify for this is that a person become one with the Torah. The only way that your life can be defined only by the Torah is if you are a person who is one with the Torah. What does that mean, you're one with the Torah? Take a look at Yehoshua. He never left the tent of Moshe. He never left Moshe's side. His whole life was about studying under Moshe. He never felt that he was going to take Moshe's place. That's not what he was doing. He didn't dream, according to some, that he would be asked to take Moshe's place. There were so many other people. According to some, there were people who were greater than him in Torah. But he got the job because he never left Moshe's side. Nar lo yamush mitecha oel. He was the nar. What's the translation of nar? Adolescent who never left the tent. The commentaries say adolescent, he was in his 50s. So, maybe some people wouldn't consider that old, but wouldn't call him a teenager, right? But, right, we wouldn't use the word nar, but the answer was, to him, he was always a yeshiva bacher, and he was always young, he was always just connected. So what's the most important quality that allows a person to nullify themselves to Torah? So he says, humility. Yeshua completely nullified himself to Moshe. So he says, that's the pshat in the Targum Yonasan. When Moshe sees Yeshua's humility, means he sees how much he's given up of this world and just dedicated himself to Torah. He knew that if Yeshua was going to go on this trip with the Meraglim, that he would likely face a question of pikuach nefesh. And he knew that Yeshua would give his life. And that's why when Moshe sees his humility, that's why he prays for him and gives him the yud, and maybe that's why Yeshua survives. Maybe at some point during the discussions, when they said, oh, we're going to go back and we're going to say the walls are huge and there were giants and this, and Kalev is nodding along and says, yeah, we should say that, we should say that. And Yeshua is saying, what's wrong with you guys? The country was great, the land was great, the people were only dying for our favor, and all these other things that Yeshua was arguing with them. Maybe they would have killed him. Except for Moshe's prayer, because he added a yud to his name, and that provided him protection. But the Yismach Moshe explains that the reason why Yeshua was in danger was because Yeshua wasn't going to lie. Yeshua wasn't going to lie because of his humility and his dedication to Moshe and the Torah. And so that's why Moshe has to pray for him. But Kalev didn't have this extra level of humility, so Moshe just assumed he would play along.
So if Moshe knew all this ahead of time, why would he even let the spies go out?
Because the people wanted it. That's the Shelach Lecha on Hashem. Rashi says, Hashem says, it's not a good idea. Moshe says, I know, but that's what they want. And Moshe is the kind of leader who, whatever people want.
So why Shaul also did something other than what Hashem wanted because it's what the people wanted, and he's pretty severely punished as a result. Moshe is doing something other than what Hashem really wants.
But Hashem agreed. Hashem
agreed.
They argued with Hashem, and Hashem said, fine. And that fine, Shelach Lecha, it's your choice, you'll suffer the consequences. That is permission. They didn't... the people who tried to go up afterwards were killed. Right? They did have the permission, even though it was against Hashem's advice. So, but technically,
Moshe knew that the people, what they were capable of. They made the egel. He sees what happened. Why would he think that this was okay?
The people were insisting. They wanted spies. They said, we don't want to go to Eretz Yisrael, completely blindsided. We want to go up. And they claimed that they had all these good reasons, and they were lying because really they were just suspicious of the land. And they were. But Moshe says, listen, goes to Hashem, says, what should I do? And Hashem says, listen, you shouldn't send spies. And Moshe says, what am I supposed to do? The people want spies. So Hashem says, well, then do what you want. So Moshe agrees, and that's the people.
It makes some sort of strategic sense if you're going to be entering an inhabited land where the inhabitants are not going to want to just up and leave their homes and let you take over. I mean, it makes strategic sense to send out spies.
Right, and the commentaries say that they claimed all these good strategy reasons, and the problem was that everyone knew that wasn't their real reason.
Everyone knew?
Yeah, meaning Hashem and Moshe both knew that they were really being suspicious and problematic and troublesome. I mean, all kinds. One of the commentaries says that the reason why Moshe and Hashem both agree is because the Jews would have done something worse if they would have said no.
See, that's
Can you imagine
what I'm
what's worse than
wondering,
that?
if They just could see the people as a whole were so strong-minded and
Right.
so, it's kind of like, well, if this is what they want, they'll learn their consequences. Maybe that was more their, realization. Well, they'll learn the consequence.
Right.
Like
And
sometimes we
that's
have
really
to
Hashem
do
lets
this.
us make our own choices.
Yeah.
And He did allow us to do it, so technically we weren't breaking His commandments until we came back and gave a false report.
But he doesn't say shlach lechem for them, for the people. He's saying to Moshe,
Because
shlach
Moshe's
for
representing
yourself.
them. Yeah, Moshe's representing them. Hashem says, listen, the point is Shlach Lecha means it's not with my counsel. I remove myself from this, says God. And the fact is they have free will, so they even afterwards they could have made a good choice. Just God knows that this isn't going to go well. I mean, that's... So, says the Yismach Moshe, what we're saying here is that this parsha, or the story of Kalev, becomes the source of sometimes the end justifying a means, like you were saying. This is the source that sometimes you need to, like in the case of Kalev, sometimes, now the Medrash doesn't, the verse doesn't tell us where we can apply this to. And here's where you need real Das Torah to be able to say, well, then where else does it apply? When do we say, Eis Lasos Lashem, that it's a time to do for God, Heferu Torasecha, where we can transgress the Torah? The people who pulled out that verse and tried to use it, whenever they feel like visiting, I need to eat treif today because it's healthier and whatever, come up with some argument like that. That's silly. You can't say that. So but we do find some precedent, at least here, where Kalev is allowed to lie in order to save his life, according to one pshat, or according to another interpretation, that he felt that this was in order to overcome their plot, their plan.
Were they really planning evil?
That's what it sounds like.
Or did they really feel that they would not be able to conquer the land?
Either way, and there are those who say that they really felt they couldn't do it, but either way, while they were walking back, they were discussing this plan of how we're going to best convince the people that the land is no good. So there was discussion amongst them, which Kalev was pretending to be part of. So says the Yismach Moshe, that's the meaning of the Midrash. Vayikra Moshe lo ben Nun Yehoshua. Moshe refers to Hoshea ben Nun as Yeshua. Why? Why did he pray for him? He prays for him because he knew Yeshua's life was in danger. Well, then why isn't he praying for Kalev? Because mi yitain tahor mitame lo echad. Who can bring tahor mitame as a metaphor for who can bring good out of an incorrect means? In other words, mi yiten tar mitame means who can bring something good out of doing something bad, or who is allowed to do something where the end justifies the means. And the answer is lo echad, the way the Yismach Moshe reads it, the one who isn't one with the Torah, the one who isn't on the level where he's going to get the protection from, the one who maybe is in danger and is going to have to lie in order to save his life. You should know that don't think that because you're doing something bad that it's going to backfire against you. Sometimes it is okay to do something tameh and something tahor will come from it. Mi yitain tahor mitame is connected to this verse, not regarding Yeshua, but explaining why Yeshua is different than Kalev. Yeshua is in danger because he's not going to lie. And that's why he needs the prayer. But Kalev is going to lie, and don't think that Kalev is wrong for lying. Kalev gets rewarded. There's absolutely no backlash, no fallout to Kalev for lying, because sometimes something tahor has to come out of something tameh.
And lo echad, could that be like ad echad? You know how we have this thing, like the only one that was left was Paro after...
Yeah, interesting, right? The only one left who was in danger.
Right.
Well, he reads it as lo echad, the one who isn't one with the Torah.
I
but
got it.
but yeah, you could take this pshat and read it differently. Absolutely, it would be in the spirit of the Yismach Moshe's pshat.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to share with you, Reb Moshe Wolfson, probably one of the biggest Talmidei Chachamim alive today, and one of the holiest Jews in the world, if we can measure these things, and certainly one of the most influential and brilliant orators of our lifetime, Rav Moshe Wolfson, who is a Rav in Brooklyn, New York. People come from all over the world to hear him speak, and when he travels different places, people flock to him. He has thousands of followers. He's part of a yeshiva with thousands of students, but he's just an incredible personality. And he speaks every week by Shalashudas. People come up from all over the world to hear his Shalashudas Torah. It's amazing. In his shul, the lights go out by after mincha, and he speaks in darkness. No one knows the time, and he can go on for hours. Nobody's in a rush. When he speaks, no one cares what time it is. So he says a fascinating pshat. If you look in this week's parsha, right after the story of the spies, all of a sudden God adds two mitzvahs. The mitzvah of libations, right, pouring the wine on the altar, and the mitzvah of challah. What's it doing here? They should both be in Sefer Vayikra amongst the offerings. Challah maybe Vayikra, maybe earlier, who knows? But mitzvahs don't really belong in Sefer Bamidbar, and when they do, they always have an explanation. Like tzitzis is in Sefer Bamidbar, because we say that Korach came out with the talus, and that's why it's there. Right? Everything has an explanation. So what does the Medrash say? And this is really the Medrash tells us. The reason why it's here is because how does the parsha of libations and challah begin? Ki savohu al haaretz, when you will come to the land. So our sages explain that the Jewish people felt very despondent and sad that they had lost their chance to enter the land. So Hashem gave them a nechama, gave them a consolation, where He taught them the mitzvahs that are dependent on the land that they had not yet been taught. And so these mitzvahs, atluyas ba'aretz, libations, and challah, are being taught here because they are somehow a response to the story of the Meraglim. Again, you could read it both ways. You could say, here, look what you're losing, or you could say, here, eventually you'll get to the land, because when Hashem starts out with the line, when you do come to the land, they can feel confident that eventually, even though we're not going to see it, but eventually we'll come to the land. Or, as some say, at least if you can't go to the land, at least let's learn the Torah about the land, and that somehow is a fulfillment of the mitzvah of the land. But why these two? Why libations and the mitzvah of challah? If you want to talk about mitzvahs of the land, you say the more classical ones are Peah and Truma and Meiser, Shemitah. Right? Those are more classical mitzvahs of the land. Why libations and challah? Says Rav Moshe Wolfson. The Gemara tells us that Hashem created all foods to be in their best state. An apple is complete. That's why an apple has a greater bracha than, let's say, a drink of water. An apple, because it's on a high level, gets a ha'etz. If you take an apple and you smash it to the point where you don't have pieces of apple anymore, if you turn it into not homemade applesauce, which has still some chunks in it, but the real applesauce where it's just liquidy, meaning the ones that you get from the company, that's a shahako.
That's not real.
Yeah, I understand, right? But the point, even if you at home put it into a food processor that completely liquefies it, it becomes a shahako. for sure apple juice, which is just the juice. But here you actually have apple here, but because it's been smashed and beaten and changed into something less, it loses its value because it's now less than what it was before. There are two exceptions. There are two exceptions to things in creation which actually are elevated in bracha. The first is grapes, which are ha'etz, but when you smash them down and pull out the liquid, they become hagafen. Unlike all the other liquids, orange juice is a shahakol, apple juice is a shahakol, every other juice, it loses its level of bracha when you break it down. But wine is elevated. The other exception is wheat, which if someone was to chew wheat or to eat wheat in a way where it's edible before it would be adama. There are times when you can take bread and make it wheat and make it into a mazonas, but only when you completely smash it and turn it into something can you bring it to its highest level, which is hamotzi. Even though that's not the way that God made it to be. Sometimes you have to smash something in order to elevate it. Sometimes you have to, the language is changed. Like we said, l'shanos b'pnei hashalom, you're allowed to change things for the sake of peace. You're allowed to change what we call shinui, to change it from being flour into bread and from grapes into wine in order to bring it and give it its elevation. Sometimes the end does justify the means. Sometimes you have to break something down in order to make it better. So he says libations are of course with wine and challah is with wheat. So he says that this was the lesson of tshuva to the Jewish people. They should have taken the lesson from Kalev, who did lead them and trick them and lead them along, like letting them think he was with them. But because he had some greater purpose, and he says, but also in the other way, we say, "V'ez chazaktem," you should strengthen yourself. That's in this week's parsha. On the other hand, we can see for ourselves that sometimes we have to fall in order to rise up. Sometimes the Jewish people maybe need to fall in order to rise up. And they say that as it turns out, there was some benefit to the Jewish people studying the Torah for 40 years under Moshe. Maybe that wasn't part of the original plan. But he says the point is it's clear that these are the only two examples, bread and wine, where something is elevated by it getting smashed. And those are the two mitzvahs that are given to the Jewish people after this process. He says that's the nechama. Sometimes you're allowed to change things. Sometimes you have to fall in order to rise up. Sometimes you have to deviate from the proper process in order to be elevated. How to draw that line is something which will always remain a dilemma. That we cannot clarify. But there is this precedent, there is this concept of sometimes we need to fall in order to rise up. And the Jewish people, they fell, but they should have take this as an opportunity. Every time you do teshuvah, we know that where a Baal Tshuva stands, the tzaddikim and gemurim can't stand, because when you fall, you can then rise up to an even higher place. So maybe be zocha that we too should know when it is that we have to deviate, but it should always be Yerida L'tzorach Aliyah for an eventual ascent. Thank you.